adversity. And there are a lot of us who externalize the blame and blame external factors for whatever hardship we may be facing. When we do that, we give away our power. And so I like the simple mantra that sort of a tweak on the I Ching, which says, you know, the event is irrelevant, but the response is everything. And now we know that we can fundamentally measure and strengthen our response to anything and everything, which helps us forge our future.
Hi and welcome to another episode of the peopleHum interview series. This is your host Anushka at peopleHum. peopleHum is an end-to-end one-view integrated human capital management automation platform, the winner of the 2019 Global Cody Award for HCM that is specifically built for crafted employee experiences and the future of work. We run the peopleHum blog and video channel that receives more than 400,000 visitors a year, and we also publish several interviews with well-known names globally every month. We have with us today Dr. Paul G. Stoltz. He's the founder and CEO of Peak Learning Inc., a global research and consulting firm. He has been voted as one of the top 10 most influential global thinkers by HR Magazine and as one of the top 100 most influential thinkers of our time by Executive Excellence. He's also the author of 5 international best-selling books. He's mentioned that his obsession in life is really trying to decode and strengthen how human beings and their organizations respond to and then harness adversity. At Peak Learning, he's built a team that really trains leaders, C-suite staff, sales force, frontline employees, and team members with the skills to handle the onslaught of adversities facing them each day. We're so happy and honored to have someone of his stature today on our interview series. Welcome, Dr. Stoltz. We're thrilled to have you.
Anushka, it's wonderful to be with you and all of your listeners and audience throughout the world. Thank you.
The pleasure is absolutely ours. Thank you for taking the time to really talk to us today. So, Dr. Paul, just diving right deep into the interview, I'm certainly very thrilled to learn about your accolades and your best five best-selling books. And before that, I'd really like to ask you about the work that you really do at Peak Learning and how the company met with its conception and finally its birth and has now been running successfully for a strong 33 years.
Well, thank you for asking that. It's really very interesting. Oh, isn't it so amazing how the most important things in life begin with a question? And for me, that question actually was, I hate to admit this, 40 years ago. I just turned to my undergraduate advisor and professor and I thought it was the most innocent question. I just asked him, so how do we know who wins? And this was a leadership class, right? And he goes, at what? I said, anything, business school, life, sports, anything. And so he kind of strokes his chin and he said, ask that a different way. I said, okay, who fails and who fails? And he really poked me in the chest and he goes, that's going to be your first research project. Good luck. And so I think that was the first time I really spent any serious time in the library, which is where you went to do research back then. And I began a process that was really excavating because I realized, and here I am 40 years later, still excavating. But what I realized was that through the different sciences that I was able to go to and kind of pick their major revelations and begin to piece these disparate revelations together in a way that maybe hadn't been done before, that my big wake-up call was that I realized there's something super high octane about the human interface with adversity. And as soon as I realized that, I went, wow, this is the entire history of humankind. I mean, all the great and most evil and most virtuous leaders, the great societies, the everything that's ever been accomplished, everything we admire in each other stems from what we do with adversity. And I thought, wow, if that's true, if there's a thing called an IQ, what if there was something called I don't know, an AQ, an adversity quotient, where what if we could actually measure and strengthen this? So my obsession for the past 40 years of my life, and the almost 34 years I've had peak learning now, has really been trying to excavate down to what I would call the bedrock of human endeavor. Because most people listening to this or watching this certainly have a good list. Like if we asked, what does it take for a person to be a great leader? What does it take for a person or an organization to succeed? We know that list. So the real question is not what is that list, but the real question is, what is it inside the really rare human beings and the really rare organizations that actually live, grow, and be that every day when the vast majority of humankind does not? That's what I've been trying to unearth. And so that's what led me first to the piece about AQ, which is, I think, about 10, 15 years before even EQ came out in the world, which was a very important addition to our understanding. But we began our work today, which is really attempting to measure, validly, reliably measure what individuals do with adversity, how they respond to the tough stuff. And then we thought, wow, if we could do that, and it turned out to be robust. More importantly, because I'm an obsessively practical nerd, which means if you can't use it, what's the point, right? What if we could actually permanently, measurably rewire, strengthen people's AQs? What if we could equip people to be able to respond to adversity fundamentally, universally, consistently, far more effectively than they otherwise would? Can you imagine the implications that would have on human experience and let alone on enterprise, on business around the world? So that's been the work that we've been ever evolving over these 34 years.
That's great. That's absolutely incredible. And I think it's a really unique and niche field that you've chosen, and you're helping so many people and organizations excel in the corporate world. So congratulations on that, and also on the success of your 5 best-selling books, Dr. Paul.
Oh, that's so kind of you. It's such a humbling journey because, I mean, we've had the chance to measure more than 1 million people around the world, had more than 1 million people in 137 countries go through our programs. Our stuff has been, adopted by Harvard Business School and Executive Education, MIT, Stanford, Princeton, all these different places. Wow. But I have to tell you, what gnaws at my skull is I know it can always be stronger and better. So our journey is to kind of, our mantra is ever better, which means every day we really try to challenge ourselves and say, what did we do today to have the impact of what we do be even better than it was yesterday? And that's kind of the quest we have globally at Peak Learning.
That's great. So it's basically bringing out a better version of ourselves each passing day.
It's true. And, first with us, and then in the work we do. As you can imagine today, as we're having this conversation with the global pandemic, never has our work been in greater demand or more relevant or more potent than it is right now, because how we respond to and deal with this, and if we could ideally harness this adversity, what an amazing opportunity for humankind. So we try to hold ourselves to that challenge and do our best to live up to it every day.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. Thank you for that enlightening response, Dr. Paul. Going on to the second question, in this uncertainty of the pandemic, a lot of leaders have really lost their way. What advice would you really give them to kind of give them a sense of direction and help them just cope with this situation?
One of the metaphors I really like is, I used to live in northern Arizona near the Colorado River, near the Grand Canyon. And when you have a chance to go on the Colorado River, and my son actually had a job outfitting the raft trips on the Colorado River, which is epic, right? And it's an interesting thing, because if you ever get tossed off the side of a raft in those crazy rapids in the Colorado River, what would you guess is the first thing they tell you to do? Well, a lot of people go grab a raft, or put your feet downstream, or grab a branch, or call for help, or whatever it is. And you know what? Actually, the first thing you do is you breathe, because the water is so cold that the first thing that happens is you go, and then you think your body's telling you you're drowning, and you have this panic response that it can actually become a self-fulfilling prophecy where you drown. So to me, for leaders today, that air, that oxygen is your values. That now is the time to kind of breathe, take that oxygen and refocus on our values, because being the adversity guy, my belief is, although we all have values, and everybody says, yeah, we have values, we have 5 principles on our wall, or whatever it is, those are meaningless until tested by adversity. And so now, with the pandemic and everything else going on in the world right now, our values are being tested. So what better time to bring them back, take that breath, and refocus on what matters most, and stand strong on that as a leader more than you ever have before.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's really imperative for leaders now more than ever to actually navigate through these turbulent times, and that's what's really going to determine their excellent leadership skills. Absolutely agree with you.
Well, you're right, and it's one of those things, Anushka, that it's so easy to say, right, and so difficult to do, because if there's ever a time where we're going to lose our way, if there's ever a time where we're going to compromise, it's when adversity strikes, especially a chronic, intense, ubiquitous global adversity, right?
Right.
And so leaders who lead through adversity have higher level focus, which is, we have kind of this continuum we talk about, which is, you can kind of avoid it. You can just try to survive it, which so many businesses are trying to do right now. You can just cope. So a lot of psychologists would say, oh, you're coping really well. But coping is sort of like keeping your head above water. You're coping and dealing. Business schools, like the ones I've taught at around the world, teach every one of them has some sort of protocol or method for managing adversity. Like we talk about managing change, right?
Right.
The problem is that doesn't quite get you there. So what we've discovered from measuring more than 1 million AQs around the world is there's something more. The people at the top, the ones with the highest AQs, the leaders with the highest AQs, they don't just cope or manage. What they do is something fundamentally different. They're like alchemists who convert lead into gold. What they do is they take adversity and they use it, they convert it into this fuel that propels you to a place, and here's the key part, propels you to a place you never would arrive at without that adversity. We call that harnessing adversity. And there are strategies and tools that we teach and that you can use to do that with bizarre consistency. So imagine, like with the pandemic, as a leader, as a business or whatever, being able literally to look back and say, you know what, thank goodness that happened. We would never be where we are today if it hadn't been for that adversity. How cool would that be?
Absolutely. That's a great perspective. So it's basically keeping adversity at the core of organizational change over time.
Yeah, I think we've been doing a disservice to ourselves for these decades, which is everyone's been talking about, managing change and, all that stuff. And all these consultants, armies of consultants go around the world talking about that. And I know just from the evidence that we have that you can actually harness it. And therefore you can use it as a propellant. And it's not about mitigating the downsides. It's not about getting people to accept it or deal with the reluctance of change and all that stuff. There's a whole different level that has this energy and verve and possibility to it that can be methodically decoded and taught. We can equip people to do this. And leaders, the cool privilege of being a leader is you get to be kind of the lead climber, right? You get to be the one that helps show people how to harness adversity so that you have that flywheel happening. And here's the great news, which is, hey, Anushka, guess what? Not going to be any shortage of adversity. So it's like the endless fuel source for our future.
Absolutely, that's great. Love the bit of positivity. At the same time, how we need to actually leverage adversity to steer an opportunity and bring about change. That's incredible, just phenomenal. Um, Love the answer, Dr. Paul. I'm just blown right now.
Oh, thank you. No, I mean, this just tips the iceberg, right? I mean, what we've learned is in this work that we've been doing all these years with all these independent studies and everything else, is that your AQ really comes down to these 4 core dimensions. And so we talk about sort of strengthening, we measure this, but we also talk about strengthening and leveraging our core. And those are control, ownership, reach, and endurance. So if you think about your core response to any adversity, there's the question of to what extent do you perceive you could influence whatever happens next? That's the control. And there's always facets of the situation you can influence that you never even dreamed of. And then the ownership is where and how can I as a leader, where and how can I as a human being step up to help improve the situation in some way? And that's the ownership. And then reach, which has this physical weight to it, is how far we perceive this will reach into and affect everything else. So we can do things today to minimize the downside, to contain it, but also to maximize the upside. I mean, how many businesses, how many leaders today are going, okay, people, how are we going to maximize the upside of this pandemic? I mean, that sounds like an insane question to be asking, right? It's like blasphemous, but that's where the energy and possibility is. And then endurance, E, is about how do we get through this as quickly as possible. So if we focus on what we can influence, how we can step up, how to minimize the downside, maximize the upside, and how to get through it as quickly as possible, we can strengthen our fundamental core response and our core strategy with any and every adversity. And that's what generates the energy. And I know that given your business, where you're also involved in recruiting and other things like this is what draws the best talent, because you're able to be part of a team, an organization that does that on a consistent basis. Why would you want to be anywhere else?
Absolutely. Great, great. Thank you so much for that lovely response. Love the way you actually summarized the 4 parts of it too. And I'm just really enamored with the whole adversity quotient. So thank you for that, Dr. Paul.
Oh, thank you. It's my privilege. We learn more every day.
Likewise, absolutely. So, coming to the third question, do you agree that certain high performing teams are also the most highly engaged teams at the workplace? And if you do, what are your thoughts? I mean, would you like to comment a little on that for our audience?
Sure. Actually, if you don't mind, I think I would almost flip that. And I would say that the most highly engaged tend to be the high performers. And then it creates a flywheel, doesn't it? High engagement creates high performance, and on and on and on. Then the real question becomes, what is it that helps keep people stay highly engaged in spite of all the ways the world is conspiring against that happening? Like today's working virtually, right? A lot of people find that very disengaging. It's hard to stay fully engaged and energized when you're talking to a screen, or when you've been hired by a company and you've never physically met any of the people you work with, or when you're leading a team and you're doing it all this way, right? But we spend a lot of time working on that equation of engagement. And what we even have some specific tools we use that are used by like Amazon's global leaders and others around the world that are ways of decoding what is it that matters to you? Well, imagine having a job where you could every day find a way creatively to fulfill what matters most to you in your job every day. And by the way, avoid your deal breaker, which is sort of that thing that if it were tripped would make you look for a new job tomorrow, right? So highly engaged teams are people who have clarity and have devised ways to fulfill what matters most to them in their jobs in a way that benefits their organization and in spite of all the adversity that makes up every day.
Right. So you're saying it's more about the purpose beyond profit. The purpose really matters more than just your daily wage or your salary. So it's about the higher organizational and individual goal.
It can be. You know what's interesting about that? Like I say, we decode this. We've been doing this research for decades. For some people, the profit really is the purpose. I mean, that's their measurement stick, right, for gauging how well they're doing, and their sense of self is deeply invested in the numbers, you know, revenues, profits, targets, goals. We shouldn't judge that, right? For other people, it's more about something deeply intrinsic, like feeling like they're really making a difference, or feeling a deep sense of purpose, or that they're making the world a better place, or whatever that may be. We shouldn't judge that. You know, we have a tool we use, it's called the Real Deal, and this part decodes those elements, and there's categories, and one of the categories is around stuff like we're talking about. One of the categories is about intrinsic stuff, and there's other categories as well. But what typically happens is those two people who are come from those two value systems don't often understand each other very well or value each other fully. That's one of the things I like about using this tool, is because it creates this inclusivity where now I value you for your what matters most to you, and I want to help you fulfill that. As a leader, that really matters to me because I know you'll be fully engaged and bring your best every day, and you probably want that for me too. And if we're in a team where everybody has that understanding and it has a pact where we honor that in each other, now by definition, you have a highly engaged, high performing team.
Right, absolutely. So it's more on a subjective level.
It is, it's subjective in the sense that it's very personal.
Right.
You know, we have our own reasons for showing up. And the leader's blind spot, and I do a decent amount of sort of C-suite executive coaching, and I always talk about the leader's blind spot. And the leader's blind spot is the assumption that what matters most to me is what does or should matter most to you. And the fact of the matter is, you know, Anushka, you've got your reasons for coming to work, and I've got mine. Not necessarily the same. And if I can get my head around that and shape my messaging and perspective and communication with you that way, I have a much greater chance of leading a diverse team of individuals toward noble goals.
Right, absolutely. Completely agree with you. Great. So it's basically being open to diverse perspectives and just accepting each one's motives and purpose and the priorities.
That's a big part of it. You're right. And being able to pinpoint exactly what those are. That's why we use this card deck, you know, the sorting mechanism to discern those,
Right.
because it takes the vagueness away, right? And so the more precisely we can communicate those, the more likely we are to live them. You know, you hit on one of the most important things right now, isn't it? Because given the way work has changed and the future of work is emerging, you know, the level of personal ownership we have to have for finding ways to have work be fulfilling and meaningful for us is greater than ever. So it's a very timely question that you're asking.
Yes, thank you. So moving on to the next question, I'm sure many of our viewers and listeners are also drawing tons of inspiration from this conversation and this interview. And you're also the originator of Adversity Quotient, and I'm really enamored with this whole concept. How did the idea exactly come to be, and what does it really mean?
Mm. So the origin was sort of the story I was telling you from my professor back in the day. And really the deeper story behind it is I've been doing this research for many years, and there was literally this large room where I dumped out all my crates of research papers from all these different sciences. And we had put one piece of paper, I had a team that said, what does that stack say? That stack, that stack, that stack. And it took days. And then we walked through our maze of research and said, if there were one unifying word or concept that brings all these different revelations from different sciences together, what would it be? And that's when we hit on the word adversity, because we were playing with struggles and hardships and challenges and difficulties and setbacks and frustrations and problems and all these things. But the broader category, the overarching is adversity. And so that's how we arrived at that. And then we had a big breakthrough, which is when we began to attempt to measure this thing called AQ, which we discovered are sort of these hardwired patterns of how you respond to adversity. So as a child, it's like, I mean, think about it. Don't your friends and coworkers recognize your laugh? And so think about, where did that come from? So it turns out as a young child, you kind of roam the planet paying keen attention to how the influential people in your life respond to life's funny stuff. And you start to develop your own distinct pattern of response to funny things called laughter. So you laugh your laugh, right? Well, and that becomes hardwired for the rest of your life. It's automatic. You don't sit back and think, how am I going to laugh? Which laughter do I choose, right? You just laugh. So same thing happens with this response to adversity. We discovered by the age of around 12 in most people, this is forming by 16 years of age. In most people, your AQ is hardwired for the rest of your life. This is until now, of course, because now we have a way of shining a light on it and measuring it and teaching people to dislodge and permanently upgrade or rewire your AQ. So it's almost like upgrading the human operating system, right? And if you can do that, everything runs better, smoother.
That's great. I don't really think our audience has ever been exposed to this before. And love the analogy that you used of the laughter. I think it's really easy to connect and relate to. So thank you so much for that as well.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yes. Just on a passing note, Dr. Paul, do you have, to kind of wrap this interview up, do you have any final sound bites you'd like to leave our audience with?
I think that this is a great time for us to remember that it is in the flames of adversity that our greatness is forged. And a lot of people in the world, depending on their belief systems or cultures or whatever, allow themselves to succumb or be weakened or victimized by adversity. And there are a lot of us who externalize the blame and blame external factors for whatever hardship we may be facing. When we do that, we give away our power. And so I like the simple mantra that sort of a tweak on the I Ching, which says, the event is irrelevant, but the response is everything. And now we know that we can fundamentally measure and strengthen our response to anything and everything, which helps us forge our future.
That's great. Love the last bit of positivity and love the mantra as well. So very relevant. And I think it's really the need of the hour. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so
Well,
much.
thank you.
Dr. Paul. It was an absolute honor to interview, and I'm so happy. And it was such a fun interview. I got to learn so much, and I'm sure if I can learn like so many new concepts and get your enlightening views in a half an hour interview, our audience are surely going to benefit from this as well.
Oh, wonderful. That's what matters most. And what a delight to join you and from opposite sides of the world during these crazy times to talk about something that is hopefully important and meaningful to everyone. Thank you.